Hello and welcome to another episode of the Goblin Ringleader podcast. And today it's just Jack. We're gonna be doing a podcast with Cole soon, pretty close to banning and restricted announcement on Monday. We're gonna go over the full set as a podcast on the Jack and Cole podcast. But for now, I just want to kind of give my take on the BNR and what I think should be banned and unbanned. So if we just we'll go to my whole screen. So these are all the cards that are currently banned in Modern. I think that what's important to sound check. Cool. It's important to preface that a lot of these cards were banned for different reasons. They weren't all banned because they were too powerful. They weren't all banned because they were homogenizing the format. They were banned for different reasons at different times in Magic's history because Modern specifically is super multifaceted. It's one of those formats where if you're an outsider looking in, you may be asking why Blazing Shoal is so good. And then, people would just tell you it was because Infect was able to just win basically turn two. And it's not fun when, you're able to lose the game on turn two consistently. And the Infect deck at the time was able to protect its combo pretty well. So it's like you need to kind of know why why is Arkham's Astrolabe? That's a great example of a card that did homogenize the format. That was just too. It allowed you to play any color. It allowed 5-color control decks to play main deck Blood Moon, and not be affected at all, which is insane to say. But Arkham's Astrolabe, looking at it as a standard player, you may not understand why this common is on the ban list. Same thing with like artifact lands, but to a lesser extent, right? A lot of people looking at these cards may not immediately make the connections that us as longtime modern players make when looking at them. So that's what kind of like the preface that I want to give to this. And then state that, my opinions on all these cards come from my play experience in Modern and what I think from play patterns wise would feel okay coming off the ban list, and why some cards, play patterns wise, just should always stay on the ban list from times that we remember and times that the people who've played before us have told us about, right? I never had to play against Second Sunrise, but I watched that Pro Tour. And I agree, right? If half the format, or like even if just a decent meta share was playing Second Sunrise, and you have these decks that like take forever to win a game, one game right out of a match, and you're winning game one, and then you don't even play game two and game three. It's really hard, and like there's a bunch of other like corner cases where right you just don't want that style of deck. And that's where I feel like a lot of cards in Modern fit under the umbrella of banned for play or quality of life reasons, right? Like Top, for example. Top is very good with fetch lands, but the real reason that Top is banned is because it is too time intensive for a good Magic player. You have a person who understands the meta and the deck that you're playing against and your deck. You have a fetch land and a top, and you could probably, on average, spend a minute every turn just thinking about whether or not you top. And that's not every one of your turns. That's every single turn. So on your opponent's turn, you're thinking about your top. On your turn, you're thinking about your top. And then if your opponent has one as well, it's just as time intensive. And so each land drop, each draw step becomes a tank. And it's just a quality of life improvement to take it out. Seething Song, Rite of Flame. Wizards really doesn't enjoy it, or I can't say Wizards because Wizards doesn't care. Players of Modern don't enjoy when the best deck is Storm. It's one of the things that like Second Sunrise was banned because at the Pro Tour it rose to the top and people were scared that everyone would pick it up and start playing it. Storm is a great example of this. And there's not many other like caliber of cards like KCI is another example. Quality of life. Nobody likes to play against KCI. If you disagree, you haven't played against KCI, and you haven't played like matches against KCI in Modern. Like the deck is, I don't want to say infuriating because every deck is beautiful in Modern, but it's one of those decks where it takes a lot of time, similar to Second Sunrise, is what it feels like. Is a deck that just takes a lot of time. It doesn't always win when it comes down. It's similar to Nadu in how, like, if you've played against Nadu, you've played against KCI, Kark Clan Ironworks, because you understand how an indeterminate combo feels bad. It feels like it's something that shouldn't be the way that it is. Like, you have so many ways to just have an A B combo in modern and in these eternal formats, that a combo that's like pseudo like that's like pseudo wins the game, like you have a possibility of whiffing, right? Um it usually makes it more fun to play against. But the issue with the way that Kark Clan Iron Works, also known as KCI, was built, and the way that Banadu was built, was that once it comes down, you really have a very low relative chance of whiffing. You get yourself into a position where you deploy your combo piece, and I've seen, shout out to my buddy Dom Striker, I've seen Nadu win with 2 Force of Despairs and a Rakdos Charm on the stack. Like, that's how crazy Nadu is, and very similar things happened back in the day with KCI. I remember a story a friend of mine told me. He had 2 Stony Silences in play, and his opponent had 2 Stony Silences in play and like one other hate card, and he still was able to just like loop Pirate Spell. Like, he was able to like get he was able to get one off the field with a disenchant, and then he was able to like take care of the other one somehow, and then he just went back to comboing. Like, these decks have the resiliency a lot of the times because of the way that modern is built. You're able to build decks in an extremely resilient way. And so when you put combo pieces, and I use the term combo piece loosely, a card that usually doesn't do much, but in a certain deck, in a certain shell, becomes this explosive source of value, creates a lot more resources than would be expected. Both of these cards I put in that category. Um, when they when they're put in that deck, their like true value is unlocked, and that's why these cards are on the ban list. Is because Nadu was the best deck, right? KCI was arguably the best deck when it was legal, but the issue was people playing against Nadu, right, would have to like sit there for a very long period of time, like, and that's not, you can always scoop, you can always concede. But I remember watching the top 8 of an NRG where my buddy Blake was playing blue black Murktide against a Nadu opponent, and his opponent was trying to like demonstrate a whole loop, but he didn't understand exactly how it all worked, so he did everything manually. And I think it was game 1 took close to 50 minutes because the Nadu player just had to manually loop their Besejus, manually loop their Ottawaras. Blake was like, I have stuff, I have interaction, I can kill you next turn, so just like manually go through everything. Like, and it's one of those things where, if your opponent has enough time to read a book while they take their turn, and there's not much that you can do, that's not going to be healthy for the format. So some of these cards are on the ban list because they're broken. Some of these cards are on the ban list because Wizards wants to respect your time, because if they don't respect your time, you'll get mad and then start going on Twitter and telling Wizards that they're dumb. And they don't want to be publicly shamed. They don't want to be called dumb. So they care. They only really listen when we yell at them, which is crazy. So the rest of these cards I put in a tiny little, so hard to see. I did a ranking tier list. My brain don't work good, and it's top to bottom. Cards that are in green are cards that can come off the ban list, 1000%, no issue at all. Cards that are in red are cards that like created problems in the formats that they were in, to the degree that if you ask people who played with those cards in those formats, they'll tell you these cards were problems. This wasn't a fun time to play Magic, like, or they were having fun, but most people weren't, right? Like, sometimes you can stick through it, sometimes you can be positive in the face of adversity, and a lot of times these decks down here, the remember category, you can ask people who played against these decks back in the day, and they'll tell you about these times when these cards were unbanned, and it really like it kind of just broke the format, right? And I'm sorry, the images are really bad quality. We'll shrink it down again soon, but for right now, we're just gonna try to like go through these real quick. So the first one that I think should be unbanned is Punishing Fire. There's no reason Punishing Fire should not be banned. They are scared that it will be too oppressive towards creature decks. Now, I will say that I appreciate that sentiment. However, there's a lot worse cards for creature decks right now. There's literally the entire black white blink deck. There's like Solitude Ephemerates running around. There's blue white controls back on the rise. Like Flage is like like there's a lot of cards that hit creature decks a lot harder. Like Goblin Bombardment, like a Johnny Flip. There's so many things that, and they printed Toxic Deluge. I think if in Modern Horizons 3, if they think that all of those cards are okay, I don't understand why Punishing Fire is on this ban list. At this point, it's taking up space on the modern ban list. It's just making the list longer for no reason. Let me put it like this. You unban Punishing Fire today, nobody plays it tomorrow. Bridge from Below. Bridge from Below may have some unforeseen craziness, right? Like you can use blood ghasts, or like there's like a lot of crazy cooking that you can do with Bridge from Below. But to be fair, Bridge from Below was banned because Hogak was dumb. And it was one of those remember me cards, right? It's like you really don't understand what you're playing against until it's gone. And you're like, oh, that was insane. And Bridge from Below was really dumb with Hogak. But without Hogak, without like a Hogak style creature, because Hogak allowed you to just do all the things with Bridge, right? And here, because the images are bad, we can just do this. So Bridge, I think, could totally be unbanned. 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, if Bridge from Below is in your graveyard, make a 2/2 black zombie. If a creature is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you exile it from your graveyard. So basically, you need non-token creatures to be sacked, graveyard from the battlefield, and you make 2/2s. And then what Hogak would do was it would allow you to take... Where are you, Hogak? There you are. So it would allow you to take those 2/2s and use them to convoke it, and you would delve, because you would exile the rest of the cards that are in your graveyard, and you would just cast it from your graveyard, and you'd have an Altar of Dimension, you'd sack your Hogak, you'd mill yourself, and then you would just continue the loop. Bridge, by itself, it enables some like cool graveyard stuff, but like it dies to graveyard hate. Like Bridge was enabled by Hogak, and it was good because of Hogak. Because Hogak is gone, Bridge can come off the ban list. Jite. Okay. You look at Jite and you say, this card is busted. How could they ever unban this card in Modern? It's going to kill all the creature. It's going to kill all the creature decks. And you know what I say to that? I say, I think you're crazy, because Jite is totally fine. It is 2 mana for an equipment with equip 2. It's 2 mana for an equipment with equip 2. I don't care what it does. You can play it in Hammer. Sure. You can play it in Stoneforge decks. Sure. It's a 2 mana equipment with equip 2. I'm going to rest my case right there. I know it's good against creature decks. I will take that L. This card is not good enough for Modern right now. The format is too fast. There's too many decks that it's not good against. And I don't know what they're going to... Like, you're going to cut a sword for this? Swords give you protection. It's just not good enough. That's my case. Now, Glimpse is a prime example of a card that was busted when it was banned and is not busted now. Elves used to be a huge contender in Modern, and for Elves to be able to have this huge combo turn where every card that they cast they get back, and like 2/3 of their deck are just creatures. Like, they're going to be drawing a billion cards, and then like their Elvish Archdruid is going to be like it's going to be crazy. Especially now that we have Wirewood Symbiote in the format, right? You're going to be able to do some like legacy style combo stuff with Glimpse. But it all dies to Bowmaster. Like, You just like flash in a bowmaster in response to the first cast trigger, and then you just kill their you cast trigger ETB, ping their Archdruid, then actually with this draw trigger, ping their Archdruid. You kill it, they lose it. You have a bowmaster, they can't cast another creature spell this turn, or you get to ping more creatures. Like Glimpse dies to bowmaster, and so it can come off the ban list. Oh no. No. Not my emulator. Boom. Okay, cards that I could see coming off the ban list, but I could also see staying on because of, reasons, right? First one being Uro. Uro's good. I remember playing against Uro. Control decks with access to Uro felt really, I don't want to say oppressive, but it felt oppressive. It would be something that you like play in your oak. This was the other thing. Uro was really good in Modern when it had Once Upon a Time, Astrolabe, Oko, Mystic Sanctuary. That deck was amazing. I think out of all those cards, Uro is probably the weakest, especially now that Flage is in the format. Uro stabilizes you against the creature decks and ramps you, but in the way that the meta is right now, at least, before the Breach ban, Uro is the safest card, I think, out of that old shell to be unbanned. I think that Uro is just like a little bit too slow. The game life is less relevant nowadays. The drawing a card is good, but it's not amazing. And then like playing blue and green is not as profitable right now as red and white because you just play Jeskai and you get to like consign in the main deck with Flage, and that's a combo in itself. So I think, or maybe like consign Uro would be like too good, but I don't even then, right? You have a 6/6 that gains 3 and draws a card. It's not removal. You're like ramping, but like you're either dead or you're not dead, right? And it's a very like it's a card that helps you win the game, but I don't know if you would prefer this over Flage, honestly. Honestly, I don't know. So I think that Uro, I could see it coming off the ban list. I could also see it not. Another amazing card that I think I'm like probably really on the fence for is Hypergenesis. So Hypergenesis is 3 mana starting with you. Each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land from their hand on the battlefield. Repeat this process until no one puts a card on the battlefield. So you would go like Cascade into this and then put like an Emrakul or an Omniscience into play. And you'd be hoping that your opponent has less permanence than you and that your card quality on average is higher. With Rhinos not even being played and like the complete fall off of Cascade decks, I mean, like if your whole deck is like big dumb things you can't cast and Cascade spells and Hypergenesis, like in the Rhinos shell, in the Living End shell, it's going to be tough because you're struggling. Maybe this is like a Living End sideboard card, right? Where they like they play it after they expect you to like kill other things. They cascade, they put their whole hand of fatties into play, win the game. Besides that corner case, if you're playing this in like a Rhino style shell where you're playing like all the split cards and like the adventure creatures as well, you're really not going to be able to do as much as you think. Um, you're going to be expecting to like put 2 or 3 permanents into play, but by turn 3, you've already played 3 lands out of your hand. So if you're on the play, right, like you're down cards. You're net neutral, but if you've been casting interaction and stuff to not die, you're gonna be down cards. Probably gonna have 4 cards in hand. You cast the Violent Outburst that goes down to 3, and then you have to hope that all 3 of your cards from that point are just like big dummies. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. Also, hugest downside in the world if you just give your opponent a Solitude, right? Or like something that just like F's your day up. So I think Hypergenesis could come off the ban list. Not 100%. Moving on, this is going to get me killed, but I think Deathrite Shaman could come off the ban list. I think that, look at it. It's a 1 mana 1/2 that exiles a land from the graveyard to make a mana, and you can pay mana and tap it to shock, and you can pay mana to gain 2. I think it's fine. It doesn't do enough. Like Legacy, it's amazing because the curve is so important in Legacy. You need everything to be on 1 or 2 or free, or to run fast mana to play something higher than that curve. Also, 90% of decks in Legacy run out of the graveyard, which is really hard, right? How do you know when to like play your graveyard hate, right? If your opponent's going stupid fast, well, it has to be on one. You just have to get your 1 mana 1/2 into play and interact as early and often as possible. In Legacy, that's like the way to win. In Modern, I don't know if this card carries the same like power level. I'm thinking about like the best decks in the format right now, and it would be decent against Breach, but it just gets shocked. Like the issue is it dies to removal, and I think it's fine. Like creature decks are in such a bad spot right now. Like comparatively to how powerful the combo and mid-range meta is, right? Like decks are either like doing really big dumb mid-range things or just winning really fast. I'm thinking of like Eldrazi Ramp versus Breach, right? Those are the two archetypes that I know in Modern right now. There's fringe players like me and like other people who just like are very hell-bent on doing what they want to do. But like I think Deathrite Shaman really doesn't impact either of those main archetypes. Like it doesn't really do anything against Eldrazi. Maybe you can take like Delirium cards out of the graveyard so their Emrakul's cheaper, but I don't think it's worth it, honestly. And then against like a storm style deck, they just go too fast. I mean, you could exile a card out of the graveyard, but you have to like pay. First off, you can't hit an enchantment or an artifact. That's another thing. It's not just unconditional graveyard hate. You can only hit a land, an instant or sorcery, or a creature. So against Breach, it's not even really that great. So I think Deathrite Shaman could come off the ban list, but I could also see it staying on. Simian Spirit Guide. Where's my buddy? Where's my buddy at? Okay. Simeon got hit when Faithless Looting got hit because they were scared about fast mana and the way that like the format was going. They were like, okay, so we need to slow things down. People were tired of playing against Phoenix. People were tired of playing against like I guess ad nauseum. I don't know why they banned Simeon Spirit Guide, honestly. They were like scared of fast mana. We don't have Elvish Spirit Guide in the format, so this was just like the natural next one to take, and they decided in that ban announcement to take it away. Here's why I think it's fine. Yeah, you're going to be able to do some crazy stuff where you can like turn 2 a Blood Moon or turn 1 a Blood Moon if you play Ugin's Labyrinth. However, I think Simeon's just like bad ramp now. It's card disadvantage. You only play it in a deck where you instantly win. But we have so many free counter spells right now. Like they printed Flare, they printed Force of Negation. Like combo decks are like the main thing in the meta right now. So I feel like Simeon would probably only go in like a fringe deck like Ad Nauseam, a fringe deck that usually isn't going to get played, and it would probably give that deck a fighting chance. I could also see it staying on the ban list for the principle of fast mana is inherently busted. But I would argue this is not fast mana. I would argue that this is so it is inherently fast mana, but it's not like Chrome Mox. It's not like it's one time. It's much more akin to a ritual. Yeah, let's call this card a 1 mana ritual. So you pay 0 mana to get 1 mana, but at the cost of exiling it from your hand. So it's like a very weak ritual that can only really be like used at its full potential in like a really busted combo deck. I think it could come off because there's better combos now in Modern. I could also see it staying on the ban list. Moving on to Earthing Pod. Earthing Pod is an artifact that can get Pithing Needled. Urza Saga is a thing that exists now. You can also just get Haywire Mighted. Like you can play Oof, you can play Karn on turn 2. Like there's Ashiok that prevents people from searching their library. There's decks that play main deck Doorkeeper Thrall, so even if you're trying to like basically combo off in one turn with Birthing Pod, it doesn't work anymore. There's just a lot of issues, like dies to graveyard hate. There's a lot of issues with Birthing Pod, and it's not as oppressive as it once was. People would talk about Birthing Pod and Splinter Twin like the same conversation. And whereas I think like inherently Pod is much more busted than Splinter Twin, we unban Birthing Pod and we'll see the same result as when we unban Twin. People will play it, people will love it, but it won't be dominating. It won't be like a super oppressive thing because it's just kind of aged out. It's been power crept, I think. Like now we have Birthing Ritual out of MH3, which is 2 mana for an enchantment, and you don't have to pay mana to do it. You just get to do it at the end step for free every turn. So I don't know. I think that this card could come off the ban list, but I could also see it staying on. So that was our I could see it right, tier. Now we're going to go to the quality of life tier. So this is basically what I believe Wizards listened to the community crying and decided to get rid of these cards mainly because people were like, I don't want to play against this card. And that's totally fair because a lot of these cards are very either homogenizing, the entire format had to warp to them. They just became one, every deck became a version of that deck, or they had play patterns that made people feel so bad that they just wanted to not play. And Wizards decided to take those away because they want people to enjoy playing the game. So the first card that we're going to talk about is the One Ring. This is a perfect example of this entire tier, in my opinion. And again, none of these, or I should say, none of these are in any order. It's just the tiers themselves are the separations. The One Ring, in my opinion, is a perfect example of this. So it's a 4-mana artifact, indestructible. When it enters, until if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. Beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life for each burn counter on the One Ring. Tap, put a burn counter on the ring, draw a card for each burn counter on the ring. So it's a 4-mana artifact that allows you to draw cards and gives you a fog, but also like the best kind of fog because it's kind of like Teferi's protection, kind of, sort of, for a turn. And it's really cool because it allows decks that usually wouldn't have access to drawing cards to drawing cards, like Titan, like Boros Energy. And because of the reason that because of the fact that every deck was able to play it and was able to get the same effect from it, it became essentially who drew their One Ring the fastest and who got to keep it in play the longest. Homogenized the format, made people who couldn't afford the One Ring feel either frustrated or just impatient for the card to be banned. And that's not where you want a format to be. You don't want people to step away from your centerpiece. Like Modern is like the eternal format that most people want to play. Like it's cheaper than Legacy and Vintage, so you have easy access to it, and it's also eternal. So if you find cards that you love in Standard, you get to play them in Modern forever if they're good enough. The One Ring kind of just pushed all of that stuff out. It turned the format into ring mirrors every round, and honestly, it wasn't fun. So it was a quality of life ban. And that's a perfect example of this entire tier is, if a card is okay, right? Bannable, but okay, but just not okay for people playing the game to play against. They got rid of it just out of respect. The next example is Gitaxian Probe. So same thing. Was it incredibly busted? Yes, it cantripped. It thinned your deck. It was your deck was 56 cards now, and you had perfect information of how to play the game. The issue was every deck played it, right? You would play probe, your opponent would play probe, you would see their probe, they would probe you. Like it was just like it never stopped. And it was one of those cards where it's free. You just have to pay 2 life to cantrip, and it homogenized the format. Similar to the One Ring. I didn't play during Gitaxian Probe when it was legal. I came in right after it was banned. And I remember people talking about how busted Probe was when I would casually bring it up. The amount of venom against this card was just insane. Another card that's just a quality of life ban, Mycosynth Lattice, right? The time when Mycosynth was banned, Karn was really played. Like Karn was one of the more played cards. Tron was one of the best decks. It won the Pro Tour. And Mycosynth Lattice was just decidedly the best win con in that deck. You would just play like a grindy control deck version of Tron. You would just try to, play Dismember and get to the late game. Oblivion Stone, like wipe the board, like hard cast your planeswalkers, and then you get a Mycosynth Lattice down, and you just turn off your opponent's lands. They can't play the game. It's not fun to not play the game, so it got banned as a quality of life. Mental Misstep, same idea as Gitaxian Probe. It was a card that, because it's free, every deck could play it, and you would just counter everything at that time in Modern was pretty much 1 mana. There's a lot of decks in Modern now, if you look at them, that are heavy on the 1-drop slot, and so Mental Misstep is a free counterspell for Tron to have, for, like, any big mana deck to have, right? That usually they don't have access to. It was really busted for the format, and it just devolved into you have to play Mental Misstep for your opponent's Mental Misstep. And that's the definition of homogenizing, and so quality of life. Violent Outburst. People did not enjoy playing against Cascade, and they were fine with losing to it on your opponent's turn. But what really felt bad about Violent Outburst was when you would lose to it on your end step, go to their turn, their creatures would have pseudo haste. Also, they can defend it with force negation while it's on your turn. So if you like hold up a counter spell, you pass. They, in your end step, cast Violent Outburst, Cascade into Crashing Footfalls. You go to counterspell or, counter their spell, Crashing Footfalls, and then they just get to force negation your counterspell, go to their turn, untap, use their mana for more things. It was a pretty frustrating play pattern, and they decided that for quality of life reasons, Cascade, all the Cascade cards would just be sorcery speed. By taking away Violent Outburst, no other card had instant speed Cascade that's played in Modern, so that was the reasoning behind that. The next two cards are kind of what we were talking about before. People don't like Storm. I don't mind playing against Storm. I'm a combo player. Totally understand why Storm is a thing. It's really nice to have a deck that just blanks creature interaction usually and just goes over the head and uses the stack to kill people. But a lot of people don't like the fact that their creature interaction doesn't do anything. They're like, but I have this fatal push and I lost to like a grape shot. It's like, yeah, but that's just the game, right? Sometimes your answers don't line up with your opponent's threats. And so Storm is one of those decks that traditionally, when it gets too good, Wizards likes to just ban a couple cards out of it to make sure it doesn't get too oppressive. Both of these cards were from when Storm was really good in Modern. Seething Song just allows you to get ridiculous amounts of mana right off the bat. Rite of Flame, it's a cumulative spell where if you have 2 or 3 of them, it just becomes like the best ritual in the world. And for quality of life reasons, just had to go. Tybalt's Trickery. Oh, okay. Deep breath. You want to talk about a card that was a design mistake and people did not expect to work the way that it did? So Tybalt's Trickery is a 2-mana instant in red. You counter a spell. Choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. The spell's controller mills that many cards, then exiles top cards from the top of their library until they hit a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then they put the exiled cards in the bottom of their library in a random order. So what people did not expect to happen was for Magic players to cast an Ornithopter, counter the Ornithopter, mill 3 cards, and then flip an Emrakul that then they cast, and they take an extra turn and they kill their opponent with. This was a design mistake, card that's inherently busted and could be like further down on this list, but was banned really quickly. Like the format didn't have Tybalt's Trickery for very long in Modern. It was also a COVID card, came out in that era, so there wasn't a lot of paper Magic, so they were able to kind of just like ban things off Arena very quickly because everybody was playing on Arena, and so the data that they had from Arena was the data they had from everywhere, pretty much. And so they found that people did not like playing against Tybalt's Trickery because losing to an Emrakul on turn 2 is just nasty. And so yeah, they banned this card for quality life because it was just extremely frustrating for a lot of people to play against, and they didn't want, in an already struggling situation, for Magic to take more of a hit. Blazing Shoal. Did you play back when Infect was the best deck? I didn't, but I've heard stories of Blazing Shoal. So basically, you pitch a Progenitus from your hand, and then you can cast the Blazing Shoal for free and give your Infect creature +10/+0, and then you just one-shot them. This was also, I believe, in the deck with Mental Misstep. There was like a lot of really busted protection cards that you could play around this. Around the Infect package, and it just allowed for really fast turn 2 kills, and similar to the argument against the Storm deck, Wizards wants people to be able to play the game for more than just 2 turns. So having the best deck in the format kill you on turn 2 with protection up felt a little bit too good. So quality of life ban. Second Sunrise, we kind of already talked about this, but Second Sunrise, 3 mana instant. Each player returns all artifact, creature, enchantment, and land cards that are put in the graveyard from play this turn. So it's like it's a take on like Brought Back, and it's like the original Brought Back, right? What all of these newer cards are modeled after when they bring stuff back to the battlefield that left this turn. But what was really busted about this deck is you would kind of just play like a bunch of free artifacts, and you would play a bunch of they're called eggs cards that when you crack them give the mana back and draw you a card. So you would just like do filter a bunch of cards, play a bunch of like play Chrome Mox and a bunch of free stuff, and then you'd like sack it all for mana, right? And then you just Second Sunrise to bring all of your stuff back. And the crazy thing about it was you didn't really have like a concrete way to win. You would just like draw your deck, and then you'd loop a bunch of either spell bombs or pyrite spell bombs to shock your opponent to death over and over again. And because it wasn't like really a determinant combo and it took forever to play through your entire deck, because you had to manually like Second Sunrise after drawing and maximizing all your triggers and your mana over and over and over again, just wasn't worth. After it won a Pro Tour, they decided it wasn't going to be worth letting people test and play with because it just took too much time and got banned for quality of life. Top. I give you a scenario. You have a top, and you have a fetch land and a basic plains in play. Your hand is nothing but lands, so you have to dig. How long are you spending on looking at the top 3 cards if they're 3 spells, right? Like, do you put the removal spell first? Do you put the creature spell first? Like, what are you prioritizing? Because you have nothing in your hand, and you can tap the top to change the top card. And you have this fetch land. So you have like infinite options, even if your hand is duds. Like with nothing, this card requires you to think. Now you add a bunch of other things. You add a bunch of like inputs, like your opponent doing things. Maybe you just Gitaxian probe, look at their hand, right? Like you have all of this information, all of these options at all times. And your opponent, if they're also playing top, has the equal amount of options. And it just leads to these games where you're staring at each other and you're activating top and you're cracking your fetch land, and you're activating top and you're passing, and then you're activating top and your opponent's activating top, and you're both just staring at the top cards of your library and you're not really playing Magic. So quality of life ban. Now we get to the fun stuff. Power level. So these 5 cards, the artifact lands, just inherently they don't feel really busted, but when you play against Affinity and you give them the opportunity to basically each land is a soul land in Affinity. It deducts the cost of their spells by 1 while also tapping for a mana. So you can think of all the artifact lands as soul lands in Affinity style decks, right? Decks that care about the artifact count. And because of that reason, it's always going to be inherently busted because the Affinity cards by themselves are inherently busted. It's like adding a really busted ritual, but in the mana base, your opponent can't counter it. They're decent. Your opponent can, march X is 0, or not march, Wrath of the Skies X is 0 to hit all of your opponent's lands. But the issue with that is you might just be dead, right? If you like your opponent hastes out like a big Affinity creature and they put a cranial plating on it, right? And then they have like a nettle cyst. They just like one-shot you super fast. You just can't let the Affinity decks go faster than they already go. And soul lands are inherently busted in Modern especially. And in the Affinity deck, these would just be soul lands. And for that reason, they're just too powerful. Gigantha. We just went over this when it got banned on the Jack and Cole podcast. So if you enjoy Magic podcasts, go check that one out. It's a playlist on the channel. Gigantha, the Wellsprings, 4 mana or 5 mana for a 5/5. Companion, if no cards in your starting deck have more than one of the same mana symbol as mana cost, then you can play it as your companion. Tap, add 5 mana. This mana can't be spent to pay generic costs. Basically, this was a 5 mana 5/5 that every deck that was willing to sacrifice some cards to get it had an 8th card in their hand that they had access to. Once they nerfed the companion mechanic, it became slightly less good, but Boros Energy still played it as a way to just like buy a creature, play it hasty with Arena of Glory, and just kill your opponent out of nowhere with it. It was a little bit too good in the deck that it was good in, and Companion is inherently a busted mechanic. We're going to talk more about that later. And this was kind of the weakest Companion that got banned, and it was just because it was a 5/5, and that shows you how powerful the Companion mechanic is. If the basically a generic 5/5, 5 mana 5/5 got banned just because it's like starting your game with an 8th card is really busted. Now we get to a land. So Cloudpost is like the ultimate Tron land. If you copy this with Vesuva, you have an extra locust. Basically, the math on a Cloudpost is the first one taps for 1. The second one taps for 2 each. So both your lands tap for 4, right? The third one, and of course the lands are tapped, but we're just doing math and like if they were untapped with like, let's say an Amulet of Vigor. The third one taps for 3 each, so you have 9 on turn 3. And then on turn 4, you have 12 mana. 4, 8, 12. No, you have 16 mana. I apologize. You have 16 mana on turn 4. So Cloudpost is like the Tron lands and then Power Crept. It's really powerful in Legacy still, Vintage playable. And it's just a little bit too powerful for Modern. A lot of cards on this list, in this tier specifically, are cards that are good, and they're just a little bit too good when you play with them for Modern. Up until this point, these cards are all pretty much Modern power level, and they're banned for different reasons. Gameplay reasons, these shouldn't be banned, right? Like, there's reasons for these cards to be banned. From here up, it's just power level and or the way that the card was built was just wrong. Like, they did not intend it to go the way that it went. So Cloudpost, really good. Yorion, same thing as Giganta, except this card was a little bit more inherently busted because you get to get a decent ability off of it. When it enters, you get to flicker any number of non-land permanents you control, and they come back at the end step. A lot of really cool stuff that you can do with this. If you have a Flicker Wisp or a Felidar Guardian, you can flicker out all your stuff during your opponent's turn to protect your stuff from a Sorcery Speed Wrath, because it says until the end of your next end step. The next end step. So really cool stuff you can do with Yorion. But again, 5 mana 4/5 flyer. Companion just inherently too busted for Modern. Power level is just a little bit too high. Beans played in the same deck. Very powerful, flickering your beans, drawing an extra card. Cast trigger also drawing an extra card, and ETB on the beans, drawing an extra card when it first was cast. Beanstalk was kind of an example of a card with the Evoke Elementals that got really souped up, and there's just a lot of stuff that when you look at it, you don't realize. 5 mana is pretty doable in Modern if you always get a cantrip out of it. If everything you're casting cantrips, then it's just a little bit good. And we're seeing this card be too powerful in other formats too, where it's been banned, right? It's very strong in Legacy. Banned not in Pioneer, not in Standard, but I forget if it's banned in Pioneer or not, but it's a card that's making waves in multiple formats, and as an uncommon, it's just super impressive to watch it. And what's insane for me to say is it's too powerful for Modern. Mystic Sanctuary, another example of a card. They were experimenting with a cycle of cards that when they would enter, if you have a number of basics that share the color, then you get an effect. And this one is basically Archaeomancer. You get to put an instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. Oh, no, that's not Archaeomancer. Archaeomancer is to your hand. But anyways, so you really busted interaction here with Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command having 2 modes that matter here. You get to counter an opponent's spell and pick up a permanent. So you can counter on your opponent's turn, counter their best spell, and then bounce your Mystic Sanctuary to your hand. Then on your turn, you play your Mystic Sanctuary, put your Cryptic Command on top, and then you just have them pseudo locked, right? If you have a fetch land, you get to do it at their end step, so you just draw it for your turn. Like, there's just so many busted things that you can do with Mystic Sanctuary, and lands that give you value are usually busted if they're in a good shell. And the deck that Mystic Sanctuary was in has a lot of these cards, these good cards that are on this ban list from here down. I'll just read them off really quickly. So in the deck that got banned with Mystic Sanctuary, it was Astrolabe, Mystic Sanctuary, Oko, Once Upon a Time, Field of the Dead, and yeah, I think that was it. And it's just insane. Oh, and Uro. And it's just insane to see so many of those cards like in the same power tier in the ban list. But let's move on. So after Mystic Sanctuary, we have a card that, might be okay to unban, but I think it's just too powerful for modern. Dark Depths is a land that when it has no counters on it, you sack it and you make a 20/20. Copy it with a Thespian stage, instant kill. Also, it flies. Also, it is indestructible. The card's just too powerful for modern. I've said it could be unbanned in the past. I've talked to people about it. Played more Legacy. The card's too powerful for modern. It doesn't die to push. It dies to a bunch of other things, but I think it's just like it would give the lands deck in modern an edge and a chance. But I don't even know if that's like a reason to unban it. It might just lead to some degenerate play patterns that we hate. And Fury, last card in this too powerful tier. Fury's just a little bit too powerful. One of those cards that, I think that you can have Plague Engineer. You can have a lot of different things, but Fury is an example of a card that just is too strong against the creature decks. It's a good mid-range threat that can just be aggressive. It doesn't kill anything. And if it 4-for-1s, 5-for-1s because it leaves a body, this is one of the most impressive cards that you can do. Also, Ephemerate with this card, nasty. So that was the power level tier. Now we're going to go into the broken tier. This tier is a little bit more straightforward. So going from right to left, Amped Raptor was just recently banned because it's just a little bit too good. So if we go back, the reason that we call this tier broken is because something about these cards inherently was a mistake. They didn't realize what it was doing. It's not so much so that it's like burned into our memory, but it's pretty bad and we don't want it. We're like, get it out of here. Don't ever give us this again. An example of this is Amped Raptor. It's a pretty good like take on, Cascade, but you have to pay energy. The issue is you get energy from this card. So this is a 2-mana Cascade spell that you can, I've seen used to get rhinos out of your deck. Like, it's insane. There's the ceiling with this card is ridiculous. And it just got banned out of the Boros Energy deck as the solution to make it weaker. And, the deck's been struggling since. Just a broken card. Field of the Dead. Fundamentally broken. They thought it would be fine. 7 lands is a lot, they said. It's a big restriction, they said. They were very wrong, they said. Field of the Dead, definitely not something that should ever come back. Like, you put it in Titan. You put it in... Again, that Sultai control deck I was talking about played Field of the Dead just because it was a way to win the game after locking your opponent out. Broken. The Delve spells, both Dig Through Time and Trick Ruse, both insane cards. Being able to put cards in your graveyard is not a restriction in Modern. In fact, it's an advantage. Many times you want cards in your graveyard, and there's a lot of cards that have downsides, quote unquote, that put cards in your graveyard, and you're like, yay! Great example of this is Faithless Looting. A great example of this is, there's like a billion ways to mill yourself. There's a Stitcher Supplier. Like, there's like a billion reasons to mill yourself. And Dig Through Time, fetch lands, surveil lands, especially now. These cards are just inherently broken in Modern. Oko. Oko is the best Planeswalker ever created. I don't know. You could argue Tamiyo. You could argue Teferi. You could argue a bunch of things, but I think Oko is the best Planeswalker ever invented. They never expected you to elk your opponent's creatures, and that was a lie. Someone in the design team was laughing when they wrote that. 3 mana, 4 loyalty, +2 created food, +1 target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes a green elk creature with power and toughness 3/3, -5 exchange control target artifact creature you control and target creature an opponent controls with power 3 or less. Now, what's really important here? Is that Oko, story-wise, stole the king of Eldraine and turned him into an elk, and then was just like sitting around like nothing happened and was watching the elk walk around. And the son and daughter, Rowan and Kenrith, I believe were their names, went and had to go on an adventure to find their father, and they found this elk, and they were like they were iffy on saving it, and they saved it, and it turned out to be their dad. So they were really lucky that they saved it. But Oko really busted Planeswalker, and it just dominated Modern when it was legal. Broken. Once Upon a Time. Free spells are usually inherently busted. Once Upon a Time is a 2-mana instant. If it's the first spell that you've cast this game, you may cast it for free. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Reveal a creature or land from among them and put it on your hand. Put it into your hand, the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. You played in Tron, you played in Amulet Titan. You think that you would play it fairly in creature decks, but you don't. Really, where you play this card is specifically in lands decks, because you get to grab your best land and just make sure that you hit your mana. Also, if you're a combo deck, you can just dig for a combo piece. Broken. Speaking of broken, green. Summer Bloom. 2-mana sorcery, play up to 3 additional lands this turn. It's funny because with this, you get to immediately cast a Primeval Titan. If you go turn 1, I'm going to play it doesn't matter what land you play a basic forest. Tap it, play an Amulet of Vigor. Then you go turn 2 basic land, Summer Bloom. Play a bounce land, play a bounce land, Titan. Then you just get to win on turn 2. So Summer Bloom, inherently broken because they didn't expect it to be good, but Titan's one of those decks that takes cards that you don't expect to be good and just makes them powerhouses. Dread Return. They knew what they were doing with this card. They just didn't expect it to be as good. 4-mana sorcery, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, flashback, sack 3 creatures. Again, putting cards in your graveyard is not a cost in Modern. Sacking creatures, also sometimes not a cost in Modern. You got Bloodghasts. Let's say you mill your whole deck, you play a land. You get 4 Bloodghasts back. You sack your Bloodghasts to Dread Return back at Thassa's Oracle and you win. Look at how easy that was. That's why it's broken. Skull Clamp. A great example of a card that they did not understand. They didn't expect it to be put on 1/1s. They were like, look, nothing bad's going to happen. However, the beautiful thing about the Skull Clamp is that it always gives more value than you expect. You have 2 1/1s, you draw 4 cards for 2 mana. 3 if you include how you cast the Skull Clamp. It's a fundamentally broken card, and you put it in Modern. Maybe it helps the creature decks, but I think it's just busted. The card advantage is busted. And then fast mana, Chrome Mox. Back to what we were talking about before. In Modern, fast mana is really dumb because you have a lot of combo decks, and it's really easy for you to win if you can get a bunch of fast mana on the field. Like if you can storm off turn 1, that's not fun. So they banned Chrome Mox because it's broken. Now we're in the Remember tier. I'm just going to point at these cards, and you're going to tell me whether or not you remember this. Remember Eldrazi Winter when Ayavugan was legal, and your opponent could play 3 Eldrazi Mimics on turn 1, and then turn 2, cast a Thought-Knot Seer, and then all of your Eldrazi Mimics become 4/4s, and you swing for 4, and they Thought Seized you? Remember. Another one. Golgari Grave Troll. Remember when they said this card was fine like 3 times and they unbanned it, and it always had to get banned again because Dredge or some graveyard deck went back to being the best thing? Like every time they unban Golgari Grave Troll, they learn how dumb Dredge is, and they never want to do it again because it's one of those things where it's like, remember that this is the thing about this tier list, right? This specific tier of this tier list. This is the Remember Me tier where we can tell stories with our friends. These are the cards that invoke memories where we laugh and we're like, yeah, I remember back when Ayavugan was legal. I remember when they unbanned Golgari Grave Troll 3 times and had to ban it. Like these are the fun cards. Like Hogak. I remember when they unbanned Hogak, or when they printed Hogak and then they had to ban it. Remember playing against Hogak? It was insane. Astrolabe. Remember playing against Astrolabe? This is one of the cards that, like, one of the formats that has these moments where you play against these super busted decks and you're like, wait, I remember when this was legal and it was busted, and you smile and you laugh because getting your teeth kicked in when you make it through the other side is kind of sweet because you get to look back and you say, yeah, I played Modern against Luris. Remember Luris? Luris with Death Shadow and Dress Down? Oh, it was so good. KCI. This is one of my favorite stories to tell is KCI. Opponent beat 2 Stony Silences, like, and a surgical. Like, it was insane. Grief. Remember playing against Grief? Remember when you would get triple Thought Seized? Remember when, like, your opponent would just take all the cards out of your hand and have a 3/2 Menacer or 4/3 Menacer on turn 1? Those are the days. Remember Nadu? So that's how I would do the That's how I break it down. And yeah, that's gonna be our video for today. So appreciate y'all watching. Thank you so much. If you enjoy Goblins content, if you enjoy watching my craziness, please like and subscribe. It's the easiest way to support the channel and to yeah to help me keep going. So